Mr. Oscar Wilde on Mr. Oscar Wilde. St. James's Gazette, 18th of January, 1895. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mr. Oscar Wilde on Mr. Oscar Wilde. An interview. I found Mr. Oscar Wilde, writes a representative, making ready to depart on a short visit to Algiers, and reading. Of course, nothing so obvious as a timetable, but a French newspaper which contained an account of the first night of The Ideal Husband, and its author's appearance after the play. How well the French appreciate these brilliant, wilful moments in an artist's life, remarked Mr. Wilde, handing me the article as if he considered the interview already at an end. "Does it give you any pleasure," I inquired, "to appear before the curtain after the production of your plays?" "None whatsoever. No artist finds any interest in seeing the public. The public is very much interested in seeing an artist. Personally, I prefer the French custom, according to which the name of the dramatist is announced to the public by the oldest actor in the piece." "Would you advocate," I asked, "this custom in England?" "Certainly. The more the public is interested in artists, the less it is interested in art. The personality of the artist is not a thing the public should know anything about. It is too accidental." Then, after a pause, "It might be more interesting if the name of the author were announced by the youngest actor present." "It is only in deference, then, to the imperious mandate of the public that you have appeared before the curtain?" "Yes, I have always been very good-natured about that. The public has always been so appreciative of my work, I felt it would be a pity to spoil its evening." "I notice some people have found fault with the character of your speeches." "Yes, the old-fashioned idea was that the dramatist should appear and merely thank his kind friends for their patronage and presents. I am glad to say I have altered all that. The artist cannot be degraded into the servant of the public. While I have always recognized the cultured appreciation that actors and audience have shown to my work, I have equally recognized that humility is for the hypocrite, modesty for the incompetent. Assertion is at once the duty and privilege of the artist." "To what do you attribute, Mr. Wilde, the fact that so few men of letters, besides yourself, have written plays for public presentation?" "Primarily the existence of an irresponsible censorship. The fact that my Salome cannot be performed is sufficient to show the folly of such an institution. If painters were obliged to show their pictures to clerks at Somerset House, those who think in form and colour would adopt some other mode of expression. If every novel had to be submitted to a police magistrate, those whose passion is fiction would seek some new mode of realization. No art ever survived censorship. No art ever will." "And secondly?" "Secondly, to the rumour persistently spread abroad by journalists for the last 30 years, that the duty of the dramatist was to please the public. The aim of art is no more to give pleasure than to give pain. The aim of art is to be art. As I said once before, the work of art is to dominate the spectator. The spectator is not to dominate art." "You admit no exceptions?" "Yes. Circuses, where it seems the wishes of the public might be reasonably carried out." "Do you think," I inquired, "that French dramatic criticism is superior to our own?" "It would be unfair to confuse French dramatic criticism with English theatrical criticism. The French dramatic critic is always a man of culture, and generally a man of letters. In France, poets like Gautier have been dramatic critics. In England they are drawn from a less distinguished class. They have neither the same capacities nor the same opportunities. They have all the moral qualities, but none of the artistic qualifications. For the criticism of such a complex mode of art as the drama, the highest culture is necessary. No one can criticize drama who is not capable of receiving impressions from the other arts also. You admit they are sincere. Yes, but their sincerity is little more than stereotyped stupidity. The critic of the drama should be versatile as the actor. He should be able to change his mood at will, and should catch the colour of the moment. At least they are honest. Absolutely. I don't believe there is a single dramatic critic in London who would deliberately set himself to misrepresent the work of any dramatist. Unless, of course, he personally disliked the dramatist, or had some play of his own he wished to produce at the same theatre, or had an old friend among the actors, or some natural reasons of that kind. I am speaking, however, of London dramatic critics. In the provinces both audience and critics are cultured. In London it is only the audience who are cultured. I fear you do not rate our dramatic critics very highly, Mr. Wilde, but at all events they are incorruptible. In a market where there are no bidders. Still, their memories stand them in good stead, I pleaded. The old talk of having seen Macready, that must be a painful memory. The middle-aged boast that they can recall diplomacy, hardly a pleasant reminiscence. You deny them, then, even a creditable past. They have no past and no future, and are incapable of realizing the colour of the moment that finds them at the play. What do you propose should be done? They should be pensioned off, and only allowed to write on politics, or theology, or bimetallism, or some subject easier than art. In fact, I said, carried away by Mr. Wilde's aphorisms, they should be seen and not heard. The old should neither be seen nor heard, said Wilde, with some emphasis. You said the other day there were only 2 dramatic critics in London. May I ask— They must have been greatly gratified by such an admission from me, but I am bound to say that since last week I have struck one of them from the list. Whom have you left in? I think I had better not mention his name. It might make him too conceited. Conceit is the privilege of the creative. How would you define ideal dramatic criticism? As far as my work is concerned, unqualified appreciation. And whom have you omitted? Mr. William Archer of the World. What do you chiefly object to in his article? I object to nothing in the article, but I grieve at everything in it. It is bad taste of him to write of me by my Christian name, and he need not have stolen his vulgarisms from the National Observer in its most impudent and impotent days. Mr. Archer asked whether, if it was agreeable to you to be hailed by your Christian name when the enthusiastic spectators called you before the curtain. To be so addressed by enthusiastic spectators is as great a compliment as to be written of by one's Christian name is, in a journalist, bad manners. Bad manners make a journalist. Do you think French actors like French criticism superior to our own? The English actors act quite as well, but they act best between the lines. They lack the superb elocution of the French, so clear, so cadenced, and so musical. A long sustained speech seems to exhaust them. At the Théâtre Français we go to listen. To an English theatre we go to look. There are, of course, exceptions. Mr. George Alexander, Mr. Lewis Waller, Mr. Forbes Robertson, and others I might mention, have superb voices and know how to use them. I wish I could say the same of the critics. but in the case of the literary drama in England there is too much of what is technically known as business. Yet there is more than one of our English actors who is capable of producing a wonderful dramatic effect by aid of a monosyllable and 2 cigarettes." For a moment Mr. Wilde was silent, and then added, "Perhaps, after all, that is acting." "But you are satisfied with the interpreters of the ideal husband?" "I am charmed with all of them. Perhaps they are a little too fascinating. The stage is the refuge of the too fascinating." "Have you heard it said that all the characters in your play talk as you do?" "Rumours of that kind have reached me from time to time," said Mr. Wilde, lighting a cigarette, "and I should fancy that some such criticism has been made. The fact is that it is only in the last few years that the dramatic critic has had the opportunity of seeing plays written by anyone who has a mastery of style. In the case of a dramatist, also an artist, it is impossible not to feel that the work of art, to be a work of art, must be dominated by the artist. Every play of Shakespeare is dominated by Shakespeare. Ibsen and Dumas dominate their works. My works are dominated by myself." "Have you ever been influenced by any of your predecessors?" "It is enough for me to state definitely, and I hope once for all, that not a single dramatist in this century has ever in the smallest degree influenced me. Only 2 have interested me. And they are Victor Hugo and Maeterlinck." "Other writers surely have influenced your other works?" "Setting aside the prose and poetry of Greek and Latin authors, the only writers who have influenced me are Keats, Flaubert, and Walter Pater. And before I came across them, I had already gone more than halfway to meet them. Style must be in one's soul before one can recognize it in others." "And do you consider The Ideal Husband the best of your plays?" A charming smile crossed Mr. Wilde's face. "Have you forgotten my classical expression that only mediocrities improve? My 3 plays are to each other, as a wonderful young poet has beautifully said, as one white rose on one green stalk to another one. They form a perfect cycle, and in their delicate sphere complete both life and art." "Do you think that the critics will understand your new play, which Mr. George Alexander has secured?" "I hope not." "I dare not ask, I suppose, if it will please the public." "When a play that is a work of art is produced on the stage, what is being tested is not the play, but the stage. When a play that is not a work of art is produced on the stage, what is being tested is not the play, but the public." "What sort of play are we to expect?" "It is exquisitely trivial, a delicate bubble of fancy, and it has its philosophy." "Its philosophy?" "That we should treat all the trivial things of life very seriously, and all the serious things of life with sincere and studied triviality." "You have no leanings towards realism?" "None whatever. Realism is only a background. It cannot form an artistic motive for a play that is to be a work of art." "Still, I have heard you congratulated on your pictures of London society." "If Robert Chiltern, the ideal husband, were a common clerk, the humanity of his tragedy would be none the less poignant. I have placed him in the higher ranks of life, merely because that is the side of social life with which I am best acquainted. In a play dealing with actualities, to write with ease, one must write with knowledge." "Then you see nothing suggestive of treatment in the tragedies of everyday existence?" "If a journalist is run over by a four-wheeler in the Strand, an incident I regret to say I have never witnessed, it suggests nothing to me from a dramatic point of view. Perhaps I am wrong. But the artist must have his limitations. "Well," I said, rising to go, "I have enjoyed myself immensely." "I was sure you would," said Mr. Wilde. "But tell me how you manage your interviews." "Oh, Pitman," I said carelessly. "Is that your name? It's not a very nice name." Then I left. End of section. Oscar Wilde to Write. The Chicago Daily Tribune, 17th of May, 1897. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Oscar Wilde to Write. Tells of his plans when released from prison. Will live in seclusion at some place near London and do literary work soon, but at present he says his brain is too weak, too worn, too tired. Will leave the prison on Wednesday. Special cable by Franklin White. London, May 16th. Copyright 1897. Oscar Wilde has broken his long-enforced silence. In Reading Prison today he announced to me his plans for the future. The terrible punishment he has suffered has not broken his spirit, nor impaired his strength. He will try to live down the shame he has brought on himself, and will not flee from his country and his enemies. Frank Harris of the Saturday Review remains his friend through his humiliation and disgrace. These are the questions put to Wilde, and his answers. "Tell me the condition of your health." "My health, physically, is good, but my brain is weary." "Have you formulated any plans for your future?" "Yes, and now I'm in the hands of a few faithful friends and my own dearest friend. To them I will deliver myself up, and with them chiefly lies my destiny. To them alone will I communicate my dearest desires." "But I ask the public, the myriad admirers of your genius as poet, dramatist, and author. Are they to lose the benefit of your gifts? Is the world to have no more masterpieces from your pen?" His brain is tired. "At present my brain is too weak, too worn, too tired, but the power that is in me will sway. I shall write again soon, but not yet. I am too tired, too distressed." "You will write in English or in French exclusively?" "I will write in English." "Do you propose leaving England?" "Not at present. As I have told you, I am in the hands of a few friends. They will decide for a while." "Allow me to ask bluntly, you do not intend to efface yourself?" "I do not. I shall get to work again before long, the moment I feel well enough." "And for the present?" "For the present, thanks to the friends to whom I have alluded, I shall retire in absolute seclusion. I shall see no one, speak to no one but them." "When may I tell the public they may expect to hear of you?" "The public will hear from me through my next work, not before it is ready, and not by any other means." "Will it bear your name?" "Most assuredly, as I am at present disposed." "Can you not give me some approximate idea of when that will be?" "No, I cannot tell until I have rested. I do not intend to work until my brain has recovered its balance." "And you seek to recover your equanimity in absolute seclusion?" "In absolute seclusion." "Will go into seclusion." "Of course you decline to name the whereabouts of your seclusion?" "Most assuredly. The place will not, however, be far from London." Major Nelson, governor of Reading Prison, here abruptly terminated the interview, as the limit of time under the Home Office regulations had expired. Robert Batho, who obtained the interview today, is a London journalist who has won Wilde's confidence by accurately reporting him on previous occasions. His account of 3 previous interviews with Wilde only accentuates the terrible tragedy in the life of this gifted man. Mr. Batho writes, "This is the 4th time in Wilde's career that I've interviewed him. Each time marked an epoch in his remarkable history. The first occasion was on his landing in Liverpool, when he returned from his first memorable visit to New York. He was young then, full of good spirits, and intensely satisfied with himself. His large oval face was youthful and handsome. He was wearing a costume which, from his necktie to his boots, was a consistent gradation of blending tints of his green and gold and yellow. He spoke of the monotony of the ocean and its inartistic colouring, and assured me that the American people are the greatest people of all ages. You know not life, you know not existence, until you have known the Americans. Old England is asleep." Wilde at Stratford-on-Avon. The next important occasion of my interviewing him was at Stratford-on-Avon about 8 years ago, when, in company with Henry Irving, George Augustus Sala, Lord Lee, and a host of literary and artistic eminences, he supported Lord Ronald Gower at the ceremony of the unveiling of the beautiful Gower group of Shakespearean statuary. Wilde was then matured, grave, and faultlessly dressed in black. He delivered an address on the art of sculpture, which for learning and eloquence was worthy of being placed on the level of the classics in criticism. His leaning was now towards France, yet, with the throwing off of his Della Cruscan insanity, he had discovered something good in England. He then assured me he had hopes for the old country. The 3rd time I interviewed him he was in room number 14, Holborn Viaduct Hotel, London, on the day of the sensation of the collapse of his action against Queensberry. A few hours after his arrest, he assured me he was sore distressed. He had refused to speak to scores of newspaper men who had besieged the hotel, because the reporters have reproduced my remarks in the witness box most inaccurately. As to the trial, he would have made me take a shorthand note of his statement, and got Lord Douglas of Howick, who was present, to write out a longhand copy of the same, and this he signed. Took the blame himself. The statement was that he could prove his innocence by placing Lord Alfred Douglas in the box as a witness against his father, the noble Marquis, but rather than put Lord Alfred in so painful a position, I determined to bear on my own shoulders whatever ignominy and shame might result from my prosecuting Lord Queensberry. He has borne the ignominy and shame, and now, 3 days before the completion of his 2 years' martyrdom, I have interviewed him for the 4th time under weird conditions, while he still wears the degrading costume of the convict. In consenting to Mr. Batho's interview with Oscar Wilde today, Major Nelson, Governor of Reading Prison, explained, "I can be your mouthpiece and Wilde's. You may frame your sentences. Such questions as the laws of the Home Office will permit me to transmit to my prisoner, I will transmit, and you shall have his replies." Wilde was sent for, and he in one room, and Batho in another, carried on the interview as published above, Major Nelson being the medium of communication. Wilde will be released from prison, according to present arrangements, between 6:30 and 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning, when he will be met by Frank Harris, who intends to take him in a cab to Windsor, 14 miles distant, for breakfast. Reporters were swarming in Reading today, as it is rumoured that Wilde's friends will obtain permission from the Home Office to remove him secretly from the prison before his term has entirely expired. End of section. The Late Oscar Wilde. The Daily Chronicle. 3rd of December, 1900. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The late Oscar Wilde. From our correspondent, Paris, Sunday night. About 3 weeks ago I was scouring Paris to discover the address of a Monsieur Sebastian Melmoth for the purpose of verifying a statement that he had been unjustly deprived of certain dramatic rights of authorship. At length, a French literary friend informed me that the object of my search was lying ill at a little hotel in the far-off Rue des Beaux-Arts. To save time, he called upon him in my name. Monsieur Melmoth was Oscar Wilde. On the same evening, I received a letter in answer to my petit bleu. I instantly answered this in person. The once brilliant and adulated poet-playwright, though in bed, looked well in the face. The first part of the conversation on his side was a mixture of defiance and bitterness. I did my best to console him, and he suddenly burst into tears. I felt deeply moved as he told the sad tale of blight and misery through which he had passed. Men who had been the recipients of sterling generosity had betrayed him and trodden him under their feet. Perhaps there was some justice in his wailing. Then he turned to religious subjects, and muttered almost savagely, "Much of my moral obloquy is due to the fact that my father would not allow me to become a Catholic. The artistic side of the Church, and the fragrance of its teaching, would have curbed my degeneracies. I intend to be received before long." He spoke almost smilingly of his operation, saying that it would cost him £40, adding that he owed nearly 2,000 francs to the hotel. The operation in question was intestinal, and then symptoms of cerebral meningitis set in. Leeches were applied to the ears, but the patient sank away rapidly. Two kind friends, Mr. Robert Ross and Mr. Turner, nursed him, whilst Father Cuthbert Dunn, one of the British Catholic chaplains from the Avenue Hoche, administered the customary rites of the Church. Oscar Wilde tried to articulate the prayers which accompany extreme unction, and his deathbed was one of repentance. Tomorrow morning the funeral service will take place at the church Saint-Germain-des-Prés, after which the body will be interred in the Bagneux cemetery. A small cross will surmount the grave, with the following inscription: Sigid Oscar Wilde, poète et auteur dramatique. R.I.P. End of section. End of Oscar Wilde, The Complete Interviews.